My name is Michiel Smit. I'm the Projects and Communication Officer at ECSA. ECSA is the European Composer and Songwriter Alliance. We represent composers and songwriters all over Europe to defend their rights on a European and international level. Today we organize a Capacity Triangle webinar. We do this with the support of the Creative Europe program of the European Commission. Before we start off, just some quick logistics and house rules. Firstly, I would like to mention that this webinar is being recorded and that we will upload the recording on our website right after the webinar. If you participate in the Q&A, but you would like to be left out of this recording, just send us an email and we can take care of that. At the end of this webinar, there will be more than enough time for the audience to ask some questions. If you have a question, just raise your virtual hand during this Q&A session so that our moderator, Helienne, knows who to give the floor to, or simply put your question in the chat box. Before this Q&A session, I would like to ask all participants to keep themselves on mute mode so that we can avoid background noises during our speakers' contributions. But without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our moderator for today, Helienne Lindvall. Helienne is ECSA's president, a professional songwriter, a musician, and a columnist. She has also worked as the board director of the Ivors Academy, and she has been very involved with the topic of today, which is metadata. For instance, with the Credits Due initiative and with the song data management platform, Oddly Sessions. Helienne, I'm happy to hand it over to you.
All right, thank you, Michiel. And welcome everybody. I'm really glad to have so many people interested in this subject. I always joke that, you know, if you say that you're going to have a panel about metadata, songwriters tend to like glance over. But if you say this is a panel about how you get paid and credited correctly, usually songwriters get really interested in that. I'm just gonna explain a little bit how I got so interested in this subject. Because initially, like most songwriters and artists, I thought when I signed my publishing deal, everything is going to be done for me. All I have to do is just write music, and then the money will come in, and you know, life will be good. And down the line, I suddenly realized that things weren't flowing through like they should. And then when I looked at some of my registrations, sometimes I saw multiple registrations. I had no idea why. Sometimes I saw people that weren't even in the studio that had been added to the registrations. Sometimes they changed later on. It all became, I just realized what a mess it could be. And through that, I then got interested. I started working with, as Michiel mentioned, Oddly and Sessions, which is like a platform for kind of collecting data and things. And that's when I realized even more, you know, how disconnected a lot of things are in the industry. And when we then launched the Credits Due initiative, we wanted to kind of tie everything together in a way, and for everyone to kind of talk about how can we solve this issue, because in particular on the songwriter side, according to our reports and other reports as well, there's a lot of money that gets stuck and remains unidentified, like hundreds of millions of dollars and pounds. And how could that happen? How can we you know, solve that problem so that everyone gets credited and everyone gets paid correctly? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we got a great panel with stakeholders from across the industry. We have Fiona Bevan, who's an artist and a songwriter. She did a great testimonial for us. I'm sitting in the UK, as does Fiona, and we had a big streaming campaign, and Fiona did an amazing testimony for that, explaining what is going on in the music industry. So if you ever get a chance to kind of look that up, it's still, because here the Parliament still has that online. It's the DCMS Music Streaming Inquiry. I highly recommend it. We also have Sylvain Piat, and he's joining us from CISAC. He's also going to explain a bit what CISAC is, because not everybody might know that. It's and what CISAC does and how CISAC can play a part in this. We also have Richard Burgess, who's joining us from the United States. He graciously joined last week when we had a cancellation by another panelist, but I mean, Richard is just as good and can show us the angle from the record, from the label side, the independent labels. Richard is the CEO of A2IM, which is the American organization for independent music companies. He's also a songwriter and an artist, so he's seen it from a lot of different sides. And last but not least, Garrett Levin, who is the head of DiMA. And DiMA is the organization for the digital, the DSPs, the providers that have the streaming services and online, and they've been really crucial in kind of coming to the table and trying to help us with this, because it's really important that everyone is involved. And Garrett is also a part of the Credits Due initiative, which we really appreciate. And he's joining us from Washington, D.C. So Richard and Garrett are, it's early morning for them. So we really appreciate that you join us. But to kick it off, I'm going to kick it off with you, Fiona. So
hi.
Hi, welcome. To kind of start off, I'm really curious to you're both you've been an artist signed to a major label, independent label, lately self-releasing artist. Yeah. You've written some really big records for other artists. You can look that up online if you want to see all the amazing records that Fiona has done. So you kind of seen this issue from all different angles. Can you kind of explain how the workflow goes in all those different, like how
yeah
you work with information and credits when you do that?
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose it is different. Okay, so as an artist at the moment, as you mentioned, I'm a self-releasing artist. So actually, for the first time ever, I'm really in control of all the data on the back end. And in a way, that's why I've got so heavily involved with Credits Due at the moment, because it's made me realize how incredibly difficult it is to find out the information you need and to enter it correctly when you're releasing music. You're trying to be your own record label. And so it takes a lot of self-education, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, maybe. I just wanted to quickly say the other side of the coin. When you're a songwriter for other artists, you're in a position where, sometimes the song can come out and you've had very little engagement with the back end and the data. No one's even asked you your PRO number, your identifier number on PRS or ASCAP or whatever. Or they spell your name wrong, or they don't use your middle name, or they do use your middle name, or they use a pseudonym. And so there are so many problems, and there's so much to say about this. And I think it's kind of fascinating that we're now trying to unpick everything and solve some of these problems. And some of them feel very basic and should be kind of basic to solve, but maybe aren't. And I guess we're going to dig into all of that. But yeah, I just wanted to.
So just to kind of roll you back to like when you started out, when you worked when you had your major label deal, did you ever deal with data at all?
I dealt with song titles and I guess submitting the information of who played on the songs and wrote the songs. Even then, I think producers who were supposed to be getting percentage points ended up kind of not getting paid. So there were certain things there where the system was not quite right and there were problems, which then takes a really long time to unpick. It takes a lot of man hours or woman hours to unpick and solve. But yeah, I think it's very much more mysterious when you're on a label, or even when you're signed to a publisher. You very rarely have to actually deal with like registering a work on your PRO site, you know, like the PRS site, for example.
What information would you give your publisher at all? Like, would you give your lyrics?
Yeah.
Would you give them splits?
Well,
would you discuss splits? Or?
You're supposed to give them lyrics, title, splits, everybody's complete and correct name, and actually what, you know, and hopefully recording of the song. You know, often you don't know someone's surname, or someone else has spelt it wrong, or there's like a DJ with a pseudonym. So it can get very confusing. And so nowadays I'm really, you know, anal about these details, because I know that it's going to get completely garbled down the line if you don't literally find out how to spell everybody's surnames. And also, I guess, getting people's like CAE numbers, their identifier numbers, their IPI numbers. So sorry, IPNs, IPI as well. We'll talk about the little abbreviation. But yeah, so I think publishers, it seems to be a huge part of their business to get it right, but there are other reasons why that data doesn't make it onto Spotify, for example, because that all comes from the label side. And maybe we can talk more about that flow behind the scenes where a lot of things go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And then, I mean, and also before we kind of move on to Sylvain as well, do you ever go in and look at your registrations to see if they're still the same? Because I think that's one of the things that I've found a lot of my colleagues, and including myself, that once in a while we have hundreds of copyrights, and you go in and suddenly you realize that they've changed maybe, or somebody's claiming something, or you know,
mysterious people can get added. And you can get rival registrations entered where there's been some kind of disagreement about the splits, the percentages, and that can be very messy. I mean, really, it takes humans to have a conversation about who, you know, deserves what percentage, and hopefully that can all happen in a nice way. But sometimes this happens on a data level, and I've often seen multiple registrations of the same song, but with slightly different information, and it takes a long time for them to be matched up. And I guess that costs a lot of money, because it's kind of human beings slowly matching everything up. It's really messy back there.
And finally, do you ever discuss splits? Do you ever discuss splits? That's one of the things too, where you kind of like right from the start can get
percentages, and that works very, very well, except when the song gets given to, say, a DJ who wants to put it out under their name, and they may or may not do any actual musical work on it, but it's coming out under their name, or an artist who wants to take some of the songwriting percentage without actually writing on it. So then there are disagreements there. Or what happens in the States a lot is the song will get passed around a sort of production house or a publishing house, and different with one of my songs that ended up with 8 or 9 writers, where actually I wrote every word of that song, you know, with 2 other musicians and producers in the room. And so, you know, splits can be incredibly contentious, but the more you can get it solved at the beginning of the process, then the better that is. I wanted to say one more thing. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, you go.
I wanted to say one more thing about the other side, you know, say instrumentalists and players who aren't actually writers or producers or artists themselves, but they're always in the studio contributing to tracks. Sometimes those people don't know how to claim their royalties. They don't know how to find their identifying numbers. And they're also not in control. They're often not in control of making sure their data is correctly inputted, and it's incredibly hard to sort it out afterwards. So there are very many people who this impacts very greatly and who are losing out in a time when even when everything is perfectly correct, it's still difficult to make a living. So I think this is really, really important. And I know we're going to talk about all these things today.
Yeah. And just a quick add to when you're saying like all these people got added to the song in the United States. Were you kind of asked to like, okay, those splits before it was released?
Well, I wasn't asked to okay the splits. I mean, there was one writer who, it was supposed to be put out by a very famous, lovely singer-songwriter who didn't end up releasing it actually in the end, but he did a bit of writing on it. I think they worked on the middle eight with another producer and maybe 2 or 3 writers in the room. And one of those writers ended up going, you know what, it's not fair. I really didn't contribute anything. I'm not going to try and take some songwriting for this. And they bowed out. And I have great respect for that songwriter, and because they know that they didn't really contribute much. But the others, I mean, also no judgment to the others because everybody's just trying to get a little piece of the pie, aren't they? But yeah, it ended up with all these people on it. Because one of them was incredibly influential, and this big producer, he'd been the reason the song actually ended up getting cut and coming out. I didn't feel in a position of power to question his splits, but it hurt quite a lot. Yeah, so yeah, there are some power dynamics there as well. And I guess the more successful you get, or the more strong your team, the more you can fight things and even question things. Because sometimes even by just questioning, you are essentially going, is this fair? Like, is this right? You know? Yes. So yeah, I've learned a lot from that. And I think nowadays I would feel a bit more confident to question and yeah.
I think we could probably do a whole panel on split discussions, to be perfectly honest. The nightmare stories that exist out there. But I'm going to move on to Sylvain for the time being. Sylvain, so what is CISAC?
Yeah, well, first of all, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Well, CISAC is an international confederation of what we call CMOs, so collective management organizations. So they are called also PROs, performing rights organizations in the US. And so we are a network of societies worldwide. And we help societies, what we call societies, so CMOs, PROs, working together. So we are addressing a number of topics under this umbrella. So we have some lobbying aspects, legal aspects, business or technology. And as part of these activities, we started very early in actually at the end of the last century, a plan to develop identifiers, standards and databases for sharing musical works documentation between our members. Because one of the key aspects of our activity is to facilitate data exchange between CMOs. So basically, when we are based in Paris, in France, so for example, if a French work is broadcasted in the US, our role is to facilitate the exchange of information. So it means that how the US PRO can have access to the documentation of the French musical work from France, that is managed by SACEM, and then how they can pay SACEM for the royalties due to this work, and vice versa, of course. So when a US work is broadcasted in France, how can SACEM identify this work, identify the rights holders, and pay out the royalties to the US PRO? So we are here to facilitate this data exchange between societies.
Right. So we kind of touched on identifiers, and for songwriters in particular, since this is ECSA, we'll start with the songwriters, the European Composer and Songwriter Alliance, and you deal with the songwriter and composer side. There are 2 different identifiers. It's the IPI that identifies the songwriter, and it's the ISWC, which identifies the work.
Yes.
Now, do you know, like, from where does a creator get the IPI, and where do they get the ISWC?
Yeah, very early. I mean, our members identify the need to share information, not only information, but also accurate identifier to facilitate the identification of the musical works and the interested parties. So the first, I mean, the core element is the IPI. Okay, so this is a number that is assigned to each of the songwriter and publishers. So any type of rights holders. And this number is allocated by society. So as soon as you become a member of a CMO, okay, they have access to the IPI and they can allocate an IP name number to this person. Actually, it's a bit more complex. I mean, in IPI, you have also links between names. You know, I mean, very often songwriters, they have pseudonyms, and depending on who they write for. And so we maintain those links in the IPI. So we have the patronyms, the pseudonyms, and each of them has an IP name number. And then on the top of that, you have the IP base number that identify the person. Okay, either the natural person or a legal entity when it is a music publisher. Okay, well, this database is actually administered by CISAC in Switzerland. But they are doing this under the governance umbrella of CISAC. And then we have the ISWC. So this is the next step, you know. The writers, they have to get affiliated to societies, they get an IP name number. And then when they register their musical works or catalogs to societies, for each of the works, they get an ISWC. So the society will use the information provided by the songwriters, the title, the list of creators involved. So this is what Fiona explained before. You have a list of songwriters with their IP name numbers. This is one of the conditions. We may come back to this in the course of this discussion, but the principle is that songwriters will register their works, the title, the list of IP name numbers, and then the society can assign an ISWC to this musical work. Okay, so these are the two conditions.
Right. So they get the PROs. Your specific PRO will have or Fiona's specific PRO will get ISWCs from you, or from like, how does that kind of happen?
They get the ISWC from, in your case, Fiona, I believe at PRS, you know, PRS member. So when you register a work at PRS, PRS will register the work and will assign an ISWC. So usually, well, now with the new system, it can be assigned in a few, it can be assigned overnight. But then the songwriter will see the ISWC usually on the ISWC, on the society portal. So when they connect to the, for example, PRS portal, I guess you can see the ISWC, you can see the IP name numbers, okay? But this is assigned by the society. And for that, I mean, they use the ISWC system that is developed by CISAC. And maybe you want to come back to this as well. But the principle is that CISAC is maintain the ISWC system. We have developed a new system 2 years ago. We make it available to our members, and our members, our CMOs, can use the system to assign ISWC to musical works. Right.
So just to kind of, because it's quite important, like what do you need to submit? Like, you can't just kind of like get an ISWC by sending in a name of a song and your name. Like, you have like a threshold, don't you, that has to be met for somebody to get an ISWC?
Yeah,
what is required?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's important to, because there are two main flows of data. I mean, I guess, going to societies, there is one flow coming from the publishers, like, for example, especially in the Anglo-American world, I mean, with the CWR. Well, we are going to use a lot of acronyms today, but this is the format used by publishers to register their catalogs to societies. So I would say that probably in most of cases, societies get data about songwriting and about musical works coming from publishers using CWR. Okay, so publishers, they send this, well, there are millions of registrations. Societies have to process those files. They have to complete the data in many occasions, compile the data coming from different publishers, and then they can assign an ISWC. And there is a second flow of information coming from the creators themselves, okay, which I believe is probably more and more, it can happen more and more often. I understand that creators, they can register their compositions directly to the society using, for example, online portals or whatever tools that are made available to them. So it can happen very often that they go to the society portals, they register the work to the society. To get an ISWC, I mean, the threshold is that in both cases, I mean, publishers and creators, we need to have at least the song title, of course, and we need to have the list of all the songwriters, so with their IP name numbers, okay? We don't need the splits. We don't need ownership information, okay? We'll come back to this. We don't need any type of other, just, I mean, the title and the list of IP name numbers.
Even that, I will say that today, with a lot of people not actually becoming members of PROs, they have to be with a PRO to have an IPI number. So then that kind of like can stop that whole kind of procedure. Because what if one of the writers, if Fiona, there's like of those 9 writers that are on there, maybe there's like this young writer that has not joined a PRO yet, then one of those names is not going to have an IPI number. Does that mean that that song cannot have an ISWC?
Not in this case, because what we have done with the new system is that if, for example, in your case, if one of the songwriters is not affiliated to a society, he can still get an IP name number. So the society, for example, in this case, PRS, okay, can use the information related to this IP, so the name of the IP. Well, obviously, we would need a minimum data set, you know, like, for example, the date of birth. We need to identify this person, like the name, the date of birth, and then the society can register this IP in the IPI, okay, even if he's not affiliated to any society. Okay.
Okay.
So then you can complete the data with all the IP name numbers. This is what we call a non-society writer. So he's a non-society, he's called NS, you know, the IPI, but he can still get an IP name number. The real issue is when, I mean, for a given work, I mean, there is maybe 2 songwriters, and the 2 songwriters are not affiliated to any society. So in this case, it's more difficult because there is no entry point to society. So there is nobody affiliated to a society. So it becomes a challenge.
And I guess with so many self-releasing artists these days, that becomes more and more common.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us to Richard for now, because of course, Richard, in this case, even though you're both a songwriter and performer, the labels which you are representing, the funnel, you're like the funnel of information that goes to Garrett's members, right? So there's no direct kind of information flow from the publishers to the DSPs, to the platforms, but it comes from your members. How does that work?
So there's been a pretty strict system since we moved into the digital realm, because, you know, you have the aggregators or the distributors who upload to the DSPs, and they even have sort of a marking system for labels. And you know, if you don't submit your information and it's not accurate, then you get dinged as a label, and the aggregators will get dinged if they try to submit. And I'm sure Garrett can talk about this more. Will get dinged. You know, you sort of get rated. You're an A-rated, you know, uploader or not. So it's critically important to have the information be correct. Of course, the problem is that the label has to get the correct information. And you know, I used to be for many years I was a producer. You know, it's the producer's job, and if you're working certainly for a major label or a large indie or a well-established indie who has good systems in place, then the obligation is placed squarely on the producer to submit the information. You really have, it's contractual. You can't even get your final sort of advance payment, assuming there is an advance payment, but you can't get your final advance payment until you've actually submitted all the information. Doesn't mean to say you can't submit wrong information, of course. You can. I don't know why anyone would, but you can. And so there are a lot of sort of holes in the system as I see it. I know, you know, I used to be on the producer engineering steering committee for the Recording Academy. We talked about this back when Apple iTunes started up. And, you know, we talked about trying to, the one sort of choke point, I suppose, if you like, or the one sort of central moment when information can really be captured is in the production process and in the DAW, the digital audio workstation. And I know, you know, obviously we've got the system sessions. I think Max Martin and Bjorn from ABBA, I think they have something to do with that. But the you know, that is the moment when it's really the best idea to capture the information. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen a lot. And as you say, with so many self-recording and self-releasing artists, it's problematic. But even with artists that release on major labels and independent labels, a lot of times they're making these records on their own, on their laptop somewhere. And, you know, they haven't been through the system like my generation did. So they don't have systems in place and they don't gather that information as they go along. And as you know, it's pretty easy to forget who played what and who wrote what and so on. So, but yes, I mean, it is, the label is the one that submits it. Of course, I do think that the responsibility falls on the individual writers. I mean, I've done pretty much everything you can do in this business. I was a studio musician, and I was, you know, as you say, I've been a writer, I've been an artist, I've been a producer, I've been a manager. I've run my own, I've owned my own labels, I've run other people's labels, and you know, this has been a problem my whole career, but it's much more of a problem now we're in the digital world. I mean, when we're in the physical world, it was relatively easy, and then, you know, a record would be pressed and covers would be made, and everybody would get a copy of it. One would assume that they could look at it and see if the credits are right. Now, you know, it's like a huge undertaking to check your credits everywhere. To that end, I actually did that myself. I went through, you know, I have hundreds and hundreds of things I've worked on in one capacity or another. And so I created a spreadsheet for 20 years ago that I just keep building. And I went in and checked all my credits as best I could. You know, I'm still with PPL in the UK and PRS MCPS in the UK, because that's where a lot of my work was done and where I was born. And I have to say I had the same experience you did, Helienne. My PRS MCPS entries were almost 100% wrong. And we registered those back in the late 70s, early 80s. This particular body of work that I'm talking about, and they were definitely right. And we own our own publishing, and there were, you know, it was Universal Music Group Publishing was on there. We never had to deal with Universal Music Publishing. We had all kinds, the splits were wrong. Just about everything that could be wrong was wrong. And I mean, I was thankful that there are portals that you can check, but I do think that in the end, as a writer, as a musician, as a producer, as whatever role you perform in the industry, that if you're not checking your credits, you are almost certainly not getting paid what you're owed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say that every single writer I've worked with, and including myself, and signed to major publishers, independent publishers, anybody who goes and checks will always see that there are discrepancies. And like you said, sometimes, you know, publishers might be added. I had that happen once where a record came out, and I happened to look on the registration, and I saw that a publisher that I've never even had a meeting with had registered themselves as my publisher, because it was a song where the rights had reverted back to me from a major publisher. So at the time, the work didn't have a publisher at all. So somebody went in and just took that a publishing company went in and took that. But a lot of the time, it might be, as they say, an error. The universal, claiming your works, that would probably have been claimed as an error. I will say that it's not just PRS and MCPS that have issues with this. I would say that every single PRO, whoever you're registered with, I had one of my collaborators recently told me that everything, or certain songs that she registered it correctly, and she was with a major publisher, and it would come back and her name had been in exchange for another writer that was in the States, in Atlanta, I believe. And she was so confounded. She didn't know what was going on. And even older songs that she had registered, suddenly this writer who didn't have any other registrations but her songs had been substituted for her name. And when I helped her, we went to PRS and looked into it. And it turned out that there was an identifier that was mismatched with one of the other major publishers. So whenever she wrote a song with somebody from that publisher, automatically her registration got changed. So there's a lot of issues happening there.
I've seen that too. Yeah, I mean, I always use my middle name, Richard James Burgess, professionally. I have done since the late 70s, because there are a lot of Richard Burgesses out there, and I just wanted something. There's quite a few Richard James Burgesses for that matter as well. But it seems like when it comes to writing and producing and everything, there isn't another Richard James Burgess that's claiming my stuff. But I have had that. I mean, I've had my stuff be reassigned to another Burgess. I've had it be reassigned to somebody who doesn't even have a related name. And as you say, there are copyright trolls out there. I ran into those when I used to be at Smithsonian Folkways Recordings. I mean, we got attacked by a copyright troll one time, and that it's pretty frustrating. I think the bulk of the problems are not necessarily people being dishonest. It's a lot of times, I think, the kinds of things you just outlined, where there's some kind of identifier mismatch. I mean, that's the downside with identifiers. If one number's wrong, it can go to somebody completely different. On the other hand, I think any kind of sort of plain text matching, like just name, title of a song matching, is insane to me.
Yes,
you need the title of the song and identify. I mean, I know there are some PROs that do, that's how they match it, and I just think, oh my God, the amount of money that must be going to the wrong people or not going to the right people must be unbelievable in that context. Because you could think of any song title pretty much, or I always think of The Look of Love, for instance. There are a lot of Look of Loves out there.
Well, and for anybody who don't know, that one is Burt Bacharach and Hal David. So you think that would, but it's the same with you're saying like the other songs that are called The Look of Love.
Well, I mean, like ABC, the band.
Oh
ABC.
yeah, of course. See, I'm thinking of Burt Bacharach, but
me too. That's the really famous one. But the ABC one was pretty successful as well. But then there are tons of other people who've written songs called The Look of Love who didn't have success with it. But it's quite possible that some of those royalties from the Bacharach or the ABC song could be leaking through to them, because matching by name is just an inadequate system. But one of the things I surmise, one of the members of our bands used to work for MCPS, and I think
MCPS, just to explain what MCPS is. So MCPS looks after the mechanical. So it's the publishing side. There are two sides to a song. There's the performance, and there's the mechanical, which is like used to be sales. So MCPS would be the one that would take care of the publishing. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just for anybody listening who don't know what MCPS is.
Good explanation. And as an equivalent to MCPS in every territory in the world. But I think you know, and one of the things that happened when you registered your titles a long time ago is they were originally on index cards, and then somebody moved those from index cards into computer systems, and that's where errors can occur. But then you know, you have these kind of governing bodies and other, you know, territorial entities that you know, when there's a transfer of information, you know, there can be errors introduced. And I can't say specifically when these errors came up, but they were legion. I mean, it was shocking to me. Like you, Helienne, I just, I don't know if there was even one that was actually fully correct in terms of either the splits or the names or the you know, publishing. I mean, there shouldn't have been any publishing companies associated with our stuff because we own it all. But they were all over our stuff. So, you know, I highly recommend that people really double check their own information. It's a drag. I mean, nobody gets into this business to do this kind of admin work. I certainly didn't. But if you don't, as I say, I think you're almost certainly losing money.
Yeah, and as I always say, even if you work at a supermarket, one of the most important things is to fill out your timesheet and and to fill out your worksheet of who did what is just as important. And just before we go over to Garrett, because we touched briefly on PPL now, so this is a thing, some composers and songwriters that might be logging onto this might also be the ones who are producers, who are players on the records that they've done. Like, how does that work with PPL? There's a separate identifier for that. In America, Sound Exchange.
Yeah, it's called the ISRC, the International Standard Recording Code, and the ISWC is the International Standard Musical Works Code. And
the identifier for the musician as well. It's the IP. Oh, actually, it's different. That's such a young one that I don't know if you have the same in all different countries. With PPL, it's the IPN number.
Yeah, I don't believe we have an IPN number here, but certainly there's also the ISNI. I don't know if you're aware of the ISNI, and that's a pretty interesting one. I think it would be really good if that took off more, but I'm trying to think what international standard name identifier. And the interesting thing about ISNI is I have one because I write books, I write songs, you know, I played a musician, I produce records, and the ISNI covers everything. I think that would be a code, and I know that Sound Exchange is starting to move into adopting ISNIs, or maybe has already moved into adopting ISNIs. I think it makes sense because it kind of identifies the human being, as it were, the person behind the creative works, because most creators I know work in different areas. So this could cover everything you do. If you write plays, if you are a dancer, if you whatever, Disney covers all the works you do that might possibly build up royalties. But PPL uses the ISRC code to identify tracks. And the problem with the ISRC code, it's a wonderful thing, and you know, very thankful that we have it. But the problem is that it was set up in a kind of a flawed way back in, I don't know, the late 80s, early 90s, I think. And there was never a registry for ISRCs like there is for ISWCs. So it becomes possible if somebody could just make up an ISRC and put it out. Now, it would get rejected at the DSPs at this point, because I think most DSPs and certainly aggregators have a sort of a checking mechanism, so they can say this is not a legitimate ISRC. But there have been incidences over the past while that records have been put out under ISRCs that are not legitimate ISRCs, and then you wind up with a problem. And there's several different kinds of illegitimate ISRCs, ones that, you know, just simply don't conform to the standard, which is one thing. But other ones is that someone could just assign an ISRC and it could be a duplicate ISRC. And that's really problematic. And I've seen that a lot. So I sort of, you know, for fun, I just poke around in metadata and look at what's out there. And, you know, I've found some really really interesting duplicates, like very, very famous songs, very, very famous tracks, I should say, that have the same ISRC but completely different songs.
I mean, I think that goes. There are. I know that Bjorn always says that there are several different registrations on the songwriting side of Dancing Queen that are that are conflicting. I mean, you'd think that Dancing Queen with ABBA is one of the most kind of straightforward registrations, but there's multiple registrations of that. And of course, what I see in dance music a lot is that somebody puts a song on a compilation. Compilations are a bit, different these days, obviously, with streaming companies, but they put a new ISRC, even though it's the same recording.
And
you get multiple ISRCs for the same recording.
It's a real, I mean, multiple ISRCs for the same recording are actually less of a problem than it's really bad if you have one ISRC for two different recordings. You should never have that. You're right. I mean, if it's exactly the same master, even if it's been remastered, it should still have the same ISRC unless something about the track has actually changed, like the length, or there's a different bridge or something like that, or somebody else is rapping on the third verse that wasn't on the other one. Then it should have a separate ISRC. But the problem is, I think the problem tracks back to the fact there hasn't really been any regulatory agency. And I know, I mean, certainly in America, people hate regulatory agencies, but we really should have one for ISRC, in my opinion, because, it's a free-for-all out there. I mean, there was one company that just literally made up their ISRCs for a long period of time, to the extent that that eventually became a legitimate ISRC because there was nothing that you could do about it at that point. So entrenched. And then of course with the boom in DIY, which we fully supported HIM because DIY artists are independent. But there's a serious lack of education. If you got, 16-year-old kids sitting in their bedroom banging something out on a phone or a laptop or something, they're not connected to the industry in any way, and they probably never heard these conversations or looked up a YouTube video about it or anything. So, I think we do have, going forward, I think it's going to get even worse, and we really need to kind of try to pin down these identifiers and make them, officialize them, I suppose.
And easily available. And I think that's a great segue to Garrett, actually, when it comes to, thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
We'll come back to everybody because we're going to open it up, but it's just with Garrett, Richard was saying that I'm saying you, obviously you're the head of the umbrella organization, but the DSPs will catch it if it's like something that looks iffy. Like, what is when a company like Spotify or Apple Music or any of these companies, what is the kind of threshold for information, like before they will kind of have a song distributed? You obviously don't let self-releasing artists just go straight and release it on the DSP. There are like distributors and things. Maybe you can explain.
Right. So, I mean, I think everyone has touched on this a little bit. The recordings and the data associated with the recordings, including whatever underlying data there is for the musical works, comes to the services via either the record label that owns the copyright or the kind of world of distributors and aggregators that have emerged in the digital music environment. So the DistroKids, TuneCores, Believes of the world that are serving primarily that DIY market that Richard was talking about. I forget, I honestly forget who had mentioned it, but yes, like the services do work with the different aggregators and distributors, do work with them to kind of identify like who's doing it well. I think it's important to note from the outset, though, how you figure out who's doing it well is always going to be a challenge. I think one of the interesting things of listening to, in particular, Helienne, Fiona, and Richard talk about it from their own perspective of their works. Literally the only people who at the end of the day know whether it is right are the people who actually wrote it, right? And so there is always going to be this difficulty of wherever you sit outside of the writing room or outside of the studio, anyone who sits outside of that is always going to be at a massive disadvantage to identify what is correct. And it's, I think, one of the fundamental challenges that we all face in tackling the data issues is that once it's, and it's been really interesting to hear you all talk about errors that have been put in afterwards, right, that have cropped up like subsequent in time. But once there is an error or something missing or something even slightly inaccurate, once it's in that digital supply chain, it becomes such a Herculean task to fix it. And so I think that's why, you know, why I appreciate being part of these conversations, why I think you have seen DiMA and the services in general talking more about data, because I think there has been in the past a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction of why don't these companies just fix it? I think just listening from the assembled panel, that's the wrong question to ask, because when you hear examples of, you know, a publisher showing up and claiming something that wasn't theirs, of splits that get added or changed, of ISRC numbers that are one number off, who is supposed to know that has happened and that is wrong, and that is that error is now in the system. And so I think that we have spent a lot of time, and by we I mean the industry, has spent a lot of time as the rise of digital music has happened, working on how to ensure that the data flows, right? You look at what DDEX does, and you look at the way we can process massive amounts of usage data in short periods of time, report it out to societies around the world, report it to rights holders, get people paid. What I'm excited about, although I recognize it as an incredible challenge, is the kinds of conversations we're having here, which is how do we improve the actual data that's being used in that reporting. So sorry, that kind of took us off a little bit from the question you asked, but the advantage of being the person who goes after everyone else talks is you get to think about all the things that they've said, and think about how how it all kind of fits together a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean we'll get back to Fiona and everyone who was earlier to kind of reflect on what's been said. But what I find interesting with that, and I think a lot of people would be curious about, because when we're talking about things, all we see is, you know, if we take a platform like Spotify, which is, you know, Spotify, Apple, two of the biggest ones, apart from like the YouTubes of this world, which is a completely separate kind of beast. But if we say Spotify, for example, which seem to get credits right more often than Apple Music, I must say, because it's displayed in a different way. It has improved in the sense that there is a field for the producer, which you don't get in Apple Music, for example. But still, a lot of the time, just for even personal experience, where I've gone to the label, an independent label, said, these are the people who wrote it, this is the person who produced it. And when I look at the registration, it's still the same person, the performer is the writer, is the producer. So somewhere that information has been corrupted. And then when I think, okay, but if there is an error, you know, click here, and I click there and it says contact the label. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, well, they're the ones who screwed it up already. And sometimes I might not have a relationship with that label. If it's, let's say it's a label like Universal, I wouldn't even know who to call at Universal. And whoever I call probably wouldn't know where that information came from. So I'd be like curious to see like how that, you know, how does that happen? What happens in between what we do? I mean, I guess that's a question for Richard as well, but also the thing like when it comes to changing the metadata. I know to kind of like to not put it all on the DSPs. It used to be with physical, it was the responsibility of the label to pay the publishers. But with streaming, the labels were like, no, it's for the DSP to pay the songwriters, but the DSPs don't have any, you don't have the IPI numbers or the ISWCs, do you?
No, so the two things I'll talk about here. One, so you didn't mention this in my bio, but it's relevant here. I am also a board member, a non-voting board member of the Mechanical Licensing Collective in the United States, which was the entity that was formed out of the Music Modernization Act, which is a big rewrite of U.S. mechanical licensing law in 2018. And it's the first new collective that we've had in the U.S. since Sound Exchange. It has a lot of really interesting features, which we could spend an hour and a half talking about. But one of the things that it has that I think has been a bit of a game changer, and hopefully a longer term game changer, is that for the first time in US law, at least, there is a statutorily designated authoritative database for musical works ownership information for mechanical licensing purposes. It's like narrow. I want to be really clear. Like it's like a fairly narrow what it is authoritative for, and it has to be publicly available. It is publicly available. It's free to any rights holder. And what we have seen is that, so that to the point that you were just making, Helienne, about the services don't have IPNs or ISWCs often, the services are sending in their usage reporting to the MLC, and the MLC is building a database. It started on the foundation of an existing private database in the US, but it has added, I think last I heard, it had added close to 20 million works registrations on top of that database. And it's a place where, whether you're a songwriter or a rights holder, you can go and you can look things up. You can through the portal, but it also runs into the exact problem that you just mentioned, Helienne, right? Which is that if you are a self-administered, if you are a signed songwriter, if you're a self-administered songwriter, you can make changes. But if you are a signed songwriter and you see something that's wrong, you will get the same kind of message in the example that you gave, which is you need to talk to your publisher. And then it becomes a little bit of a game of, well, do I have a relationship with that publisher? Is this meaningful enough for them to change it? All of those kinds of questions. I don't know that there's an easy answer to that, right? Because in part, I think there is a little bit of a fear of, if anybody can show up and make changes, are we introducing more problems to that kind of data? But I do think it's worth continuing to talk about who has the ability to fix errors, who has the ability to put things into dispute if there is a dispute over the ownership, how those disputes can be resolved. I think those are important questions, because I think it's, if we are going to start from the premise as an industry moving forward that the people best situated to know what they wrote and what they own are the writers in the first place, then we have to be thinking about what are the things we can do to empower them to ensure that things are correct when they see that they're incorrect. And it's not always the case that there's nothing inherently like judgmental about this, but it's not always the case that an individual songwriter's interests in having that corrected are going to align with everyone else's interest in having it corrected.
No, but I think so. I've got like one of my little ideas before we kind of get a reflection from Fiona on this as well. That I brought up with my PRO. Actually, I'm actually with two separate. I'm both with STIM and PRS. But was, if as a songwriter, if something changes with a registration, that I get like a ping or something. It doesn't have to say what it is that has changed, just as I say, go in and look at this registration.
Yeah.
And then I can see if somebody's kind of claiming it or if it's like changing publishers. And that particular PRO at that time said, well, songs change ownership all the time. We can't do that for every song. And I thought, well, if I spend like more than $50 on my credit card, I get like a text on my phone. So there's got to be some kind of, in the 21st century where we can at least do that to kind of just ease the flow of information. Fiona, do you want to comment on anything that people?
Well, I'm hoping that lots of the people who are watching are songwriters and artists. I mean, I'm hoping there are loads of industry people watching as well who can help structurally, change behavior and change systems, or at least educate those around them. But if there are songwriters and artists watching, I think for me, the main message to spread that could instantly change the world is, as we've said, songwriters and artists and players to check their own credits and learn all their numbers, all their identifying, the personal identifying number they need. And I suppose this is especially, because if you're a songwriter for other artists, you often end up working with, a 16-year-old artist or songwriter. And actually, the more we can all talk about this stuff, the more it's going to change. And, if there are 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds uploading stuff onto TikTok that they've written, and they're not even a PRO member, that's going to be incredibly difficult to undo. And even on major DSPs like Spotify, there are something like 80,000 tracks being uploaded every day, aren't there? So I don't even know what the number is for TikTok. It's extraordinary. And of course, some of it is covers and reiterations of existing songs. But for any new songs, no one's going to get paid. I mean, kids maybe don't even know that they can get paid for music because they've been brought up in this climate of like music is free. So that's like the big message that I would like to spread, and educate everybody about. And I'm certainly going to do what Richard said, which is make a huge spreadsheet of everything I've ever written and who played on it, and just horrendous. I'll see you all next year.
It's interesting.
A long time.
It's interesting what you're saying, Fiona, because you mentioned covers, and this is maybe something that Sylvain can answer to as well, because a lot of the time, if it's a young artist uploading covers of songs, they're not going to have an ISWC. They're not, most likely. I mean, the amount of times I've heard, people saying, "No, I'm going to sing I Can't Make You Love Me" with George Michael, and of course. Or by George Michael even, and it's not written by George Michael, and it's not even written by Bonnie Raitt, even though she performed it initially. Like, how does that connect? Is that something you can answer to, Sylvain, when it comes, if people just upload a cover, because it's just, as Richard said, it's just a name of a song. It could be like the Look of Love can be many different songs.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Probably there would be a lot to tell. I just, because in this context, for example, there are cover versions, also different versions of the same work.
Translations.
Translations, adaptation, arrangements. And for example, I mean, there is always this example of Dancing Queen, okay, where we say that Dancing Queen has like 80 different ISWCs. This is not correct. I mean, Dancing Queen has only one ISWC. So that's the first one that was assigned, is ISWC number 1. Then related to this one, this is true, you have like 80 different ISWCs, which are ISWCs of the French version, of the arrangements, Italian, and so on and so forth. So, and again, this is a very complex ecosystem where you have arrangements, adaptations, cover versions, but there is a perception from the outside that, well, Dancing Queen has 80 different ISWCs. Okay, when you look up the ISWC system for Dancing Queen, you would expect to get only one, and you get a long list. Okay. And this is also where I believe there is a bit of education to do as well, is to tell the songwriters, the artists as well, that there can be, this is not so simple, you know. And even if probably you have heard about CISNet, which is CISNet, the network of managed by CISAC, where all the CMOs worldwide are connected. Okay, and when you make a query on CISNet of dancing queen, for example, you will also get like hundreds of dancing queen, because you have the original version that was written by Bjorn and with the two other colleagues. That is, let's say, what we call domestic work, is hosted by Steam in Sweden and PRS in the UK. Okay, but then you have also sub-publication of this work. Okay, you have hundreds of sub-published versions of Dancing Queen, and this is what you can see on CISNet. And this would require more, let's say, expertise to define, okay, what is the correct version, what I am looking for. Okay, and when it comes to cover versions, I would say that probably if you upload a cover version of something, but this is not easy. Of course, you can upload this to Spotify or but the best thing would be, I mean, to look for what is the correct ISWC for this cover version. You can make a cover version of Dancing Queen, the original version, and the ISWC would be the ISWC #1. Okay, a cover version does not, if you use the same lyrics, you know, there is no arrangement, it's still the same composition. There is no change, so the ISWC should remain the same. The challenge for the artist who is performing the original version is, well, first of all, he has to get an authorization. Okay, but then is how to identify the correct ISWC and to embed this ISWC in the metadata that will be uploaded to Spotify or YouTube. And this is where we need probably to make some tools available to creators, so they can have an easy access to this information. I think for cover version, probably they should have to go through their through CMOs to get the correct ISWC, to get the authorization to do it.
But that requires that they're a member of the CMO. But
back to
well, because I think, you know, a lot, and we touched on this before, you know, a lot of, I think to some degree, Sylvain, that the hypothetical cover version that you're talking about there is probably by like a signed artist who's like doing a like kind of a cover. But I think this started with a little bit of like, there's a lot of covers being uploaded every day through the aggregators, through the distributors. There's a lot of stuff being put on TikTok. I think, you know, something that this goes a little bit back to Richard's point about somewhat of the insanity, although I think it's a necessary insanity to some degree because of scenarios like this, of like the matching process at the end, right? Of whether it's the collective or whoever it is who's getting the reporting based on the sound recording, right? If you're going through a distributor, there is going to be an ISRC associated with that cover. And so the question then becomes, how do you attach it to the right ISWC? Some distributors are better than others. Some of the aggregators are better than others at kind of what kind of publishing solutions they offer, to the extent they offer them. But I think it's an area, I'm going to use a word that like has kind of become really kind of toxic in the industry to some degree. But I think that part of the conversation needs to be, no one really wants to say this, like, because no one really wants to be accused of being the gatekeepers, right? No one wants to be the ones who are like stopping things from getting in. One of the great things about digital music, both on the creation side and the distribution side, is how frictionless it can be to sit down, create music, and get it in front of people, into people's ears. Right, like it's frictionless in a way that it never was before, but that lack of friction comes with a cost on the data and the payment side, and I think some of the conversations that are starting to happen, and I'll point back to the MLC about this for a second. The MLC has a tool that they released last year that they call DURP, D-U-R-P. It's Distributor Unmatched Recording Portal, and it is a specific view of their portal that they make available to the digital aggregators, that allows them to see the recordings that came from them that are unmatched. and to start unmatched to a musical work, right? So like the recording is reported, there is mechanical royalties owed to the underlying song, but the MLC has to date been unable to match that recording to the right underlying song. It's been by all accounts, it's been a really interesting response from the distributors. Not all of them are participating, but those who are finding it like a really useful tool that they feel like they've never had access to before, of like what happens on the other side once they send it in. And so I don't think tomorrow it's going to lead to massive changes, but I do think it's the kind of tool that if we leverage the data that exists out there, and I don't just mean the kind of data we're talking about, the individual song metadata, but the scale kind of data that the collectives have to identify where various things are slipping through the cracks or various pipes are leaking. I think it gives us a better chance of finding ways that actually meet people where they are, right? Because we're still talking about, to your point, Fiona, a 16-year-old who's putting something on TikTok or putting something on DistroKid. They're not going to ever, no offense to any of us, they're never going to tune into a webinar like this. Never. Like, I know my target audience. It's not the 16-year-olds who are like uploading to DistroKid, right? And so like, how do we make it easy for them to actually do it without even necessarily knowing that they're doing it, right? Like, how do we bring the industry to them and the things that we need to actually make it function without like necessarily saying to them, okay, so before you ever start recording your beats in your basement, you need to get it, register with a PRO and get like, they're done. They're done, right? And so I don't know. I think a little bit of my soapbox of like, how do we actually reach the people that we need to reach where they are?
I think, and just before I give it to Richard, I think that one of the things that you sort of touched on, that nobody wants to be the gatekeeper, but I know that in the UK with the DCMS inquiry and with the working groups that we've had, and one of the things that the Ivors Academy was campaigning for was a minimum data requirement for anything that would be featured on any platform. And I know it's been like a real uphill struggle in the sense that we figured, okay, well, an ISWC, if we have an ISWC, that any information that kind of changes or gets added later, at least we have like one data point, like one that everything can kind of go into. But there was a lot of resistance, in particular from labels, saying that would, they say, oh, it would take so long to get an ISWC, and they were pointing at CISAC at that point and saying, oh, CISAC takes forever to issue, it could take months, and we want to get the record out. And this is even now we're talking about labels that are established labels. When we're looking at distributors, there are distributors that don't even have a field for where you put in songwriters, that don't even have a field for the other identifiers. The only field they have is for ISRC. And if you don't have an ISRC, they say, we'll assign one to you. And I mean, my idea would be that if for the independent aggregators and distributors, if you have a field, because almost anything that you fill out online, there will be like a threshold. If you haven't filled everything out, then you won't get on to the next page. But it seems like the requirement is so minimal, because really it's a bigger requirement for the picture, that you have a picture that is the right size and the right pixelation, than who actually made the track. And that's my soapbox as well. I don't know, Richard, did you want to say something on this?
Well, I mean, I agree with everything that you've all said. I mean, I think one thing is that these problems have been solved in other industries, and I think the music industry is pretty much behind the eight ball on that. Like I say, I think the problem with the ISRCs is they were kind of evolved at a time when the need was not that great. with CDs and everything. And then it was when we moved into the digital world that ISRCs became absolutely critical, because, when you've got a physical good, it's relatively a lot easier to sort of track the history of that, from it being manufactured through being delivered to retailers and being sold and sent back, the money being sent back. With digital, it's completely different. It's just an electronic transaction. But I mean, you think about fintech, in America, we still use checks, strangely, but I can write a virtual check on my bank. I mean, you can send money a lot of other ways now, but you can still write a check, but you can't write two checks with the same number. So I think that we could, and I say we, and I realize how sort of insane it is to say that, because as an industry, we're not very good at we, but it would be possible for us to put systems in place to make sure that there are not duplicate ISRCs or duplicate ISWCs or incorrect ISRCs, incorrect ISWCs, if we wanted to adopt the technologies needed. To the ISWC question, this is a really thorny one. I really do think that it's a problem not having an ISWC the day the record goes up on DSPs. And obviously I represent labels at A2IM, but I think you can tell I have a pretty broad perspective on the industry. And I don't understand why issuing an ISWC without knowing what splits are, and I'm not quite sure what the criteria are for an ISWC being issued, but it makes more sense for any record that comes out, any track that comes out, to have an ISWC, even if it's a placeholder ISWC, where the details can be filled in at the publisher level or the PRO level later. It's not a PRO, is it? But, the CMO level later. Because if you don't have an ISWC now, you're totally dependent on that track being identified by title, and I think that's just an absolute disaster. The other thing I wanted to say that we haven't touched on, but I think is important, is something that, that I've been pretty passionate about since the early 2000s, is, credits for everybody, because, and you just touched on this, I think, Helienne, in terms of these fields that are not available to a lot of distributors. And I think that is a super big problem, because, we've got now what we were referring to back in the early 2000s as a digital black hole, where, because there are a lot of tracked records out that have never been on in any physical format, the credits are lost forever to a large extent, because nobody knows who the bass player was or the background singer was, and I personally think that all those contributions are critically important. I mean, I was a studio musician in the UK. We didn't get residuals at all. We got paid a flat fee for the session, and but the credits were super important to us, and still are. I knew what the deal was when I was a studio musician. I didn't, I got paid union scale or some multiple of union scale, but I did expect to be credited on the record. I wasn't in some cases. Some producers are really obnoxious about that. Some artists are really obnoxious about that. But that's your livelihood is predicated on getting credit. That's how you get booked for the next session, or other writers call you up and want to write with you because they like what you did on this record or that record. So that's a whole other level of metadata that we haven't touched on that much, but I do think is critically important as well. But the most important is these payment identifiers, as I see it, because if we don't do that, then money's just being lost and going into black boxes and ultimately getting distributed to the wrong people, and that really bothers me.
And so before we open for questions, so if people want to have any questions or comments, they can, if you want to go in the chat or raise your hand. I wanted to kind of see if anybody else wanted to kind of comment on Sylvain. It looks like you wanted to maybe comment on what was being said.
Yeah, just on the speed of allocation, with the new system, we try to speed up this allocation process. And for example, we made available an allocation service to publishers. So as soon as they have the titles, the creators, they don't need the split, they don't need the ownership information. They can get an ISWC the next hour. You know, it's a very speedy process. Then the question, I believe, is also, I mean, the speed of implementation by the different stakeholders. We make a number of services available, but we can see that sometimes implementation is quite slow. So I mean, they all have their own agenda, their own, resources. And sometimes we can see that even publishers, you know, major publishers asking for new services, asking for more, we make it available, but it can take months or even years to implement. So this is a reality of the system that we have to accommodate. So I don't know, Richard, for example, I mean, who is your publisher? I mean, if you publish yourself, but for example, I mean, as soon as you have the title, then the creator's IP numbers, you can get an ISWC the next day.
That's great news. Is when you say implementation, do you they're implementing across the board as a publisher, or do you mean implementing that particular, like, you know, requesting that particular ISWC?
No, I mean, implementation, deployment of those new services is based on API or whatever, you know, but deployment of these services across the board, I mean, across publishers, across societies as well, even our members, you know, it takes time, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, this is what we are trying to push. You know, we also make a new service available to DSPs in the middle of this year, where they can query the ISWC system using web services. So if they have an ISWC, they can retrieve the metadata compared to what they have in their own systems. That would be one way, you know, more or less to validate the ISWCs they have. So we are trying to push for the you know, making this type of services more and more widely available. But again, you know, we can see that it's moving slowly, but it's moving, I believe, in the right direction. But it's also, I believe, where we need a full cooperation of all the stakeholders in the value chain. When we come to the record companies, the labels, you know, they complain that the ISWC can take months to be allocated. This is not the case anymore. But even to have the ISWCs in their workflow might take time, you know, because they need to assess what is the impact on their own systems.
I mean, I'll work on that with the labels. I don't mean to take over, Helienne, but a quick question. Do you mind?
Yeah, sure.
So Sylvain, could you explain if you're a record label and you've got a record coming out and it's you know, with PRS or with ASCAP BMI, what's the process that at the record label will go about to obtain that ISWC for that song?
Well, for the record labels, this is a question mark. For the publisher, it's easy now to get it, okay, quickly. The question now is, what is the articulation between, you know, the publishing workflow and the record label workflow? I mean, how does it work? How does this interaction between, or even songwriters, you know, what is the interaction between the songwriters and the record label? I mean, how we can, for example, we speak about music managers when they input data into the record label forms or whatever. So how does it work in practice? How can you make sure that the songwriters, the music managers have all the information they need to complete the record label forms, and how they can get an ISWC? This is the sort of question that we need to address now. We worked on the publishing side, we worked on the songwriter side, but it's true that we never really addressed as far as CISAC is concerned, the record label side.
It is an interesting point, and I think that I know that in some countries, like for example in the UK, PRS and PPL have worked together to try to, you know, do a matching, because, you know, when they collect for public performance, you know, they collect, you know, both the performance side and the publishing side collect money. So then they try to kind of like match ISRCs with ISWC, so it's easier to distribute. I would never trust my manager to like put in any data because he's never in the studio. So I think that would be a disaster. Most likely it would be the producer, but because of the kind of disjointed way that Fiona talked about, that some records are done, the producer might not even, by the time you get the finished or the producer that does the finished thing, he might not even have ever met the people who wrote the song. So I guess that the issue would be where I always look at what is the inclination? What would, why would it matter to label if the songwriters get paid if they're not part of that payment cycle? What is the, what would make people get this information together? And with that, I'm kind of looking at Garrett. If somebody has a question, just put it in the chat. But in the meanwhile, I'll just ask you, Garrett, like when it comes to distributors, what kind of requirement do you have from the kind of aggregators and distributors? Because you were talking about, and Richard mentioned the whole thing of like, knowing, some have worse reputations than others.
Yeah, so I can't speak to like the specific service level requirements because that's not an area that I deal with directly with the services and with the aggregators. I do think that it's there is, I think, to put it bluntly, there's very little that is required in terms of like writer information in things that are uploaded via distributors in terms of like actual requirements, just like there is very little that is required from record labels. Like, this goes to your point, Helienne, of like, should there be conversations about minimum viable data sets that get included? As of right now, I don't believe that there are. I think you need to have an artist name and a track title, and you need to have. I think you need to have an ISRC to get it onto the services, but I don't think you need to. Like, other than that, it's. I don't think there are deep requirements for it.
A photo, that's what I've learned. It has to be the right pixel. We have a question here from one of our viewers. Thank you all for shedding light on some very important topics. This is from Antonia Lyle. I have a question. I manage a producer whose music was used in a movie he wrote and distributed the record, was registered with PRS, but did not register it with PPL or neighboring rights. Where would the performer royalties in this instance go? And is there a way to backdate payments? Is there anyone that can answer that?
I think there's a certain amount of ability to backdate payments, but not forever, is my understanding. I think my understanding would be if neighboring rights are payable and they're in the territory that PPL collects, and then they'll go to PPL, but they'll just sit there until somebody claims it. It's exactly the same as the MLC. The MLC, there's money sitting there and it's available, but people have to claim it. That's my understanding.
So let me ask you, I'm going to ask Garrett this one too, out of curiosity, like if you're, if a DSP gets multiple, because this happens quite a lot, where you have publishers and PROs sending invoices for their music, and it adds up to more than 100%, which clearly, that is a sign that there's some mismatch going on. What would happen with the royalties of that song? Do you have any? You're on mute.
It's a good question. I think in most scenarios, the dispute doesn't necessarily happen at the service level. It will happen at the PR, at the collective level. So like in the MLC situation, right, when the services send in the data. If the MLC puts something into conflict, the money doesn't go out until that conflict is resolved. In some ways, the way, the US market is interesting on the performing side because we have multiple PROs that each represent some amount of catalog that probably does add up to more than 100% on a given monthly basis. I think for the most part, the way that has been solved is through licensing on a catalog basis, and just kind of like you license out the catalog, and so you don't have to deal with it as on a dispute on an individual track basis by kind of licensing around it. Like you kind of do eat the cost to some degree of paying out more than that 100%. So I think there are some services. I mean, YouTube is an interesting example. I know you kind of put them to the side, but YouTube in general operates as a claims-based system, similar to the way that MLC and other collectives do. And so YouTube, I believe, puts things into conflict when they get multiple claims on a work, and basically tells the parties who are claiming it, this money is now in conflict. Figure it out and report back to us like who actually owns it. I think and that's similar to how the MLC's conflict policy works as well, which is it puts it into conflict, notifies the parties that are in the conflict, and then awaits resolution of that conflict.
I mean, there's another factor there too, and that is because I poke around in metadata for fun, as it were. You can tell how sad my life is, right? You'd be surprised how many songs there are out there that don't add up to 100%. So you've got the more than 100% problem, but you've got the less than 100% problem as well. And I've seen that a lot, which I saw it in my own catalog because things got messed up with PRS, MCPS. Very often, wouldn't be fully claimed, but I've seen it in other people's catalogs as well. So, I think it all goes back to the idea that, and I think Garrett just touched on this, is you really got to sort of be your own best sentinel, as it were, for your copyrights, whether you wrote them or whether you own them or what. If you're not, then, as I said before, you're almost certainly not getting paid correctly.
Right. Yeah. It's and I think for a lot of people, it's also, even if they see something wrong, knowing where to go to correct it is a big issue that the industry kind of needs to look at. We have another question from Karina Kempe. I have taken down my albums, DIY artist labels, from the DSPs because the metadata was just too old and couldn't get changed. I am now redistributing them through a new distributor to get it right. What should I think about? Yeah, maybe Fiona, you're a self-releasing artist. What would you do? What would you say would be you're on mute.
Sorry, I just had to read the question myself. Sorry, just to kind of understand fully. I
think she means that she's taken down her albums because from the DSP because the metadata was too old and couldn't get changed.
Okay, well, I suppose, data doesn't age. So I guess it doesn't matter if the data is old, but it does matter if the data is not correct. So I guess it is worth trying to correct it and re-upload. If you want your stream numbers to stay the same, you have to have the same ISRC codes as you originally had, and the same title written exactly the same way. And so there are certain things that have to stay the same if you want to keep the numbers. But if you want a fresh blank slate, I don't think that really matters. It's quite hard to take things down. The only way I've ever had something taken down is either a label has taken something down for me, or I've re-uploaded a correct version and told a label to take something down. So the new one replaces the old one, but for a while they're both up there on Spotify or whatever. So it's a strange process, but it's worth it to get the metadata right in the end, I guess. You could also contact the original label to get them to try and change the metadata. Maybe that's a question for Garrett. that bit.
It's a DIY artist and label, so I think that's that might be her. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you want to try to avoid taking down your stuff because you can lose all your follows and likes and views and stuff like that, or listens or whatever they are on what particular service. I mean, there are ways to preserve them, but that's a really tricky thing to do. So, and as you said, Fiona, the metadata doesn't age. I mean, if it conformed to UPC, ISRC, ISWC criteria in the first place, then it still will. So there must have been some other problem, I think.
Well, maybe the thing is also that sometimes people might have some of the information, but not all of the information. And once something has gone up, there's no way of kind of adding information through one of those independent aggregators. Like if it's a bigger label, then they have a channel where they can actually correct and add things. But if it's through an aggregator, it's kind of some this entity sitting between you and the DSPs.
Right,
So,
and I think Garrett might have alluded to this before, but one of the things about uploading stuff is that it's really, really hard to change it once it's out there, because it goes out, it's like tentacles. It just goes out to so many different outlets. Chances are you're going to be coming across wrong metadata that you uploaded many, many years from now, because it'll be in Turkmenistan or something like that. Who knows, but it's not easy to pull stuff back from the, the digiosphere or whatever we call it.
yeah, good question. I'll go to the next one, which is Catherine McAteer. When you're the writer in the UK working with a US independent publisher, do you register your track with PRS MCPS, and the publisher also registers it with a PRO and mechanicals organization in the USA? 50-50 split. I know this one, but I'm going to let somebody else take that.
Well, I can.
Yeah.
Well, I can try. I mean, my understanding in this case, well, it depends. It doesn't say whether you are a PRS member, for example. So, but if you are a PRS member,
it would be a UK writer that is a PRS member,
exactly.
and they have a publisher. So it's like a publisher in the US that would most likely register it over there.
Yeah, yes, and the US publisher would register to the US societies, and then it would be disseminated, I guess, through the network of sub-publishers. If this US publisher has sub-publishers in different countries, it can happen that, for example, this US publisher has a UK sub-publisher, so it could be also registered via the UK sub-publisher to PRS as well.
Yeah, the information flows. So it's like it's once you have a publisher, it's the publishers that will register it.
Yes,
with a PRO, and they will say, because your publisher will know that your PRO is PRS, so they will put that in the registration that your immediate PRO is PRS. Because if you register it as well, there's the likelihood or the risk of there being conflicting ISWCs or multiple ISWCs or conflicting registrations kind of increases.
Yeah. But yes, and so it's up to the US publisher to register with the relevant US PRO, should it be ASCAP or BNI.
Yeah, and then that information will flow back to PRS, because you will have PRS next to your name in the registration. Okay, Lakito, I think this is about the answer from Fiona. Wouldn't that create a problem of having two ISRCs for the same song? Surely you should keep the same ISRC. Oh, that's not for Fiona. There was it was about when you said you uploaded two uploads of the same song. That might be what he's referring to.
I'm referring to Karina's, the one who was going to do the takedown.
Right.
You really should keep the same ISRC.
Yeah, so Fiona, maybe.
Yeah, you definitely, well, that's really interesting, actually. That's actually a question for someone else, not me, because if you've had a song with a label, the ISRC the front of the ISRC, the prefix, is going to be relating to that label.
That's
And if you're
true.
then releasing it on your own label, that's actually a very good question.
Yeah.
You know, do you then replace it with the ISRC prefix of your own label, or does it stay forever with the ISRC of a label that you're not on anymore?
It shouldn't matter that you know, when I was at Smithsonian Folkways Recordings, we did a lot of, you know, we bought a lot of catalogs and we did a lot of compilations, and theoretically you should use the original ISRC. You can issue a second ISRC. I mean, as I said, you know, you get any famous song will have 40 or 50 ISRCs assigned, but as long as it's the same version of the song, it really shouldn't need to have a different ISRC. And technically the payment is not made strictly because of the ISRC. There's a whole lot of other factors as to why the money will go to one, you know, label or another. But the main thing is that that song be identified. What happens if you have multiple ISRCs, then you have to kind of match those ISRCs. And so the 50 ISRCs will all flow back to that original recording and to whoever owns it. I mean, especially in a time like this where we're seeing so many mergers and acquisitions and you know, sort of roll-ups of companies, both on the label side and on the publishing side. You know, copyrights are changing hands all the time. So it would be a nightmare if we had to reissue ISRCs every time a copyright changed hands.
Yeah. So it doesn't look like we have any other, did you want to say something about that, Garrett?
No,
oh, okay, I just saw that, yeah. That we have any other questions for now. I know that we've run for like an hour and 40 minutes. Fiona, you wanted to say something?
Can I just ask Garrett a really quick question, please? Which is, you know, you said about DIRP, the Distributor Unmatched Recording Portal, which is a great title.
I didn't have nothing to do with the title. Nothing to do with the title.
Is there, yeah. Is there, so you said that the MLC made that available to digital aggregators and that was ending up being quite a useful tool in matching. Is there an obligation to use that tool and to match, or so far is it just sort of like goodwill kind of investigation, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think as of right now, it's goodwill, right? The obligation to match and claim under the MLC is just a function of the way the royalty structure works, which is if you have something sitting in unmatched and you don't go claim it and the MLC isn't able to match it, you're not going to get your money. And so I think, and I see, Lakito, you asked a question as well about how long it sits. So DIRP sits separate. It's like a tool that the MLC developed that is separate from it's not really fully related to the unclaimed money. The unclaimed royalties are broader in scope. They're not just stuff that's coming in from the aggregators. The statute, the Music Modernization Act in the US, requires that the MLC attempt to match works for no less than 3 years before they can make any sort of distribution from the unclaimed royalties. As of right now, there has not been any sort of like public announcement about kind of when to expect any sort of distributions out of that unclaimed money, but that's what the statute says. It's a minimum of at least 3 years of attempts to match it. So, you know, I think that the idea behind tools like DIRP, and the MLC has done some great, I think they've done some webinars about this and put out some news about it, is really how do you leverage the data that they have and the insight that they have from the kind of US market-wide, you know, there's 50 some services that are sending in usage reports on a monthly basis to the MLC. That all gets aggregated. The MLC attempts to match all of that. And they're getting this unbelievably rich set of data that I think is helping to identify where some of the challenges arise and where some of the use cases are for unlocking some of that money that's sitting unclaimed. And I think DIRP is a really good example of that. But there's no one's required to use it. No one's required to do anything with the information that they glean from it. But I think it's a hopeful sign of the kinds of things that we can do to learn a little bit more about where stuff is falling through the cracks and what can be done to incentivize and nudge people to actually fix some of those things.
Yeah, I think incentivizing is a good important word. Like, how do we get people or companies incentivized? And we are, with credits due, to kind of circle back with, as we're wrapping up with credits due, we are trying to get some distributors. There's no equivalent of DiMA when it comes to distributors, sadly. So we're interested in having distributors, independent distributors, coming in to our credits due campaign to see how we can kind of like try to square that circle with everyone that is a stakeholder within this. And I want to just, as we're wrapping up, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Sylvain, Piat, Fiona, Bevan, Richard Burgess, Garrett, Levin. Amazing input. This is like one of these discussions that, I mean, God, we've been almost going for 2 hours, and I'm sure there would still be questions to ask, but I really look forward to try to work to kind of solve this and make it easier for young creators that come in, so that they don't have to face what all of us are facing, to just make it more streamlined in the end, and for everyone to have an incentive, as Garrett said, to fix it. Thank you all very, very much. And thank you to everyone who's been listening and viewing, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter and all the socials. And we have a newsletter that people can subscribe to that is on our website. And we have Mark wanted to say something.
Yes.
Our Secretary General, who is sitting in Brussels.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Helienne, and thank you to all the speakers and participants. I just wanted to add some things that, we've been working, of course, on music streaming quite a lot, which includes the issues of metadata. There is the European Parliament decided to draft a report on music streaming. So we'll need also your voices to be heard in order to fix streaming and to fix all the issues that we have also been discussing today. This is coming,
Great.
So please don't hesitate to raise your voice. We'll be in touch with you about this. Thank you so much.
Great. And somebody asked, where can I watch the recording? Where will the recording be, Michiel, of this?
It will be on YouTube and on the event page where you also signed up for this webinar.
Great.
In the next
All
few
right.
minutes.
Lovely.
Thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so
Helienne.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.